Hi, second grade teachers. This is Sarah and Carrie from Korea. And hopefully your materials are starting to come in for your land and water unit. Maybe some of you have actually already gotten started. And this video is just meant to be a helpful resource to show you hands-on demonstrations of what we've been hoping to show you during our workshop together. So we're going to really quickly go through the 3 hands-on activities that will take place during your unit. The first model comes on day 2, and that's where you make a landscape model with the plastic bag and crumpled up newspaper underneath, showing how water always flows in a landscape from places that are up high in mountains down low. So water always travels downhill. That's an explore on day 2. The next model that you're going to make is on day 5, and that's where you make a simple map of Maine. So after looking at some Maine maps with kids and discovering where the mountains are, this is the assessment that helps them show their understanding that rivers flow from places up high, mountains, down low to the ocean where the river finally ends. So that's an assessment on day 5, simple model. And then the last model we were going to demo is the day 7 model, and that's the sandbox model, where students pour water over sand and show how water is really powerful and can cause erosion. And then they use different materials to try to prevent that erosion from happening. And one thing that I do want to point out is that we only modeled 2 sand dunes in this video. So one was the control, and then one was the one where you tried to prevent the erosion. And you can compare them side by side. It's ideal if you're a student, instead of just making 2 sand dunes, if they can make 3 or even 4 all side by side. So if you use your pan the long way, we did it opposite. We did it the short way. And now we're just going to jump into the 3 hands-on activities in a little more detail. So for the day 2 explore activity, you're going to make a little model and spray some water on top. And the activity here is to try to explore, where does water go on the land? Where do the rivers start? And where does the water travel? And to experience that together.
So for this activity, we just need some scrap paper or newspaper, a white trash plastic bag, a tray of some form, and a spray bottle of blue water. And the first thing you do is tell them that you're going to make their paper into mountains, so they can crumple it and just stick it around your tray. The neat thing about this is that everybody's model will look a little bit different. It doesn't matter where you put your mountains. This will work no matter what. Once you've got the mountains there, you take your white plastic trash bag and cover over the mountains. And kind of tuck it in around the edges. And tuck it in on the sides so your water doesn't escape. And you can already see some valleys and some ridges. Once that's all tucked in, you're ready to start your experiment.
Remember, very first thing of all, make a prediction. Where do you think the water is going to go in this town? Where will the rivers start and where will they go? So when you start spraying the water on the model, this is a great time to use those talk science questions. What's happening? What do you notice? Where's the water going?
And you can actually see these rivers forming. You can see the big blobs of blue sliding down, and then there's a pond at the bottom. And there's not, as the water gets on the top, as it adds more water, it starts to flow down those mountains. Some stays near the top, but most of it starts to flow down those mountains. The whole purpose is just to show kids that water can flow, that water flows downhill. And we want the kids to be able to actually experience water flowing downhill, not just read about it in a book or see it in a movie. This will actually allow them to see water flowing downhill.
So a great way to solidify the student learning here is to actually have them try it again. So dump out the blue water, and this time put your hills in different places. So create an entirely new landscape. There could be more mountains or fewer mountains, put them in different places, and see if you can predict exactly where those rivers will form, where the water's going to go, where the pond will be. So have students do this until they really get the hang of being able to understand where water flows through the land. And hopefully they'll pick up on the fact that no matter how many times you rearrange your mountains or where you put them in the landscape, water always flows from high places down to low places. And then the next day you use the mystery science video to really explain what was happening during that spray bottle activity. And like a teacher mentioned during our workshop together, the hands-on activity that Mystery Science video has you do during the video is called Paper Mountain. Both activities are great. They're both hands-on. They both involve spray bottles and explore the exact same concept of water starting in high places and flowing downhill to low places. You probably won't have time to do both, but give one a try and see how it goes. The Mystery Science explanation will work equally well with either activity.
So on day 4 or 5 of this unit, you're going to be doing some mapping of mountains and watersheds in the state of Maine. And so this is the model your students will produce at the end. It's very, very basic. It basically shows that they're mountains and then the rivers flow down the mountains to the ocean. You're going to need for this activity some tape, something to make mountains. So for this, we used Play-Doh, but you could use cotton balls or pom-poms or crumpled paper, anything that is going to make something elevated on this side of the state of Maine. And you need some yarn. And the whole point of this activity is to show that rivers start at the mountains and flow to the ocean in Maine. So you're going to have your students make mountains. Some of them might make an individual mountain up here and one over here. Sometimes students might just make the long chain of mountains because they saw that it was a different color in one of those maps. It doesn't matter, as long as this part of Maine is a little bit higher. And then they're going to take their blue yarn, and this is a river. It can be just water. It doesn't have to be the specific Penobscot River or the Kennebec River. You just want them to show that it starts up here on the top of the mountain and it flows all the way down right to the ocean. And so then they can tape that river in place, and you know that they understand that rivers start at a mountain and flow down to the ocean. They could even put a second river in down farther. But again, you don't need to worry. It's not a geography quiz. We don't need to know where they go beyond from the mountain down to the ocean.
And then the students will label their model. Label mountains, rivers, the start and the end of the river, and little arrows to show what direction the water is flowing. And that's as detailed as you need to be for this first assessment. And then towards the end of the unit, one of the last activities is the sandbox model. So we just wanted to show you really quick what that might look like in your classroom.
The things that you'll need for this experiment are, if you're going to do it inside, you'll need a tray, some sand, some water, a couple of yogurt cups, something to measure the water with, and something to slow erosion. So in this case, we have a couple of pieces of sponge and a piece of cloth. The other thing you'll probably want is some way to prop your tray up, so any old book will do, or a brick or anything you have around.
So prop up that tray and it'll just keep things a little drier, a little less sloppy.
Step 1. Your students get their tray with their sand, and they have to make 2 dunes. So however big they want to make them, just kind of squish that sand around, make 2 little like bread loaves.
And make each sand dune roughly the same size so that it's a fair test. You wouldn't want one to be huge and one to be tiny. And ideally you'll make 3 or 4 sand dunes, and that's because you're going to try using different materials, 3 different solution ideas to try to prevent the sand from washing away. And if you have 3 different dunes, you'll be able to try a different material on each dune and compare and look to see which one worked best.
And then have them make some predictions. When their water comes out of their yogurt container with little tiny holes in the bottom, is it going to make the sand go away? Is it going to stay on top of the sand? What do they think will happen? So once they've made that prediction, you can come around with some water. It doesn't have to be a measured amount, but it should be the same amount. So I'm going to use this cup I have and measure to the bottom of the green line. This makes it so that your experiment is the same throughout. You want to try and control all the variables and make this a fair test. You want to make the same amount of water in every experiment. So I have my little bit of water, and I have my, if your school has watering cans, use a watering can. I just put some holes in the bottom of the yogurt cup. And then I'm going to hold that over my sand dune and pour in the water. You can ask the students, what's happening? What do you notice? What do you think would happen if we poured more water? So now students will revisit their worksheet and they'll draw the after picture of their sand dune. Make sure they include, what changed, what looks different. And then they're going to think for a minute about how they can protect this other sand dune and prevent this other one from eroding. So they're going to gather some materials. I'm going to use maybe some sponges and a piece of cloth. And they get to try this 3 different times. So they might want to use a piece of cloth this time and sponges the next time. If you're outside, they can gather materials outside. So have them place their materials on their dune. So I'm going to put my piece of cloth right here on my dune. And then, in order to make this a fair test, so we want to make sure that the same thing happens to this dune that happened to that dune. The only thing that changed is I put a piece of cloth over the top. So I am going to take my water, and I'm going to pour the same amount of water into this little cup. And then I'm going to hold my watering can the same distance above. And since I moved it a little bit last time, I'm going to move it again this time. And wait till all the water flows out. Again, you can be walking around asking those science questions. What's happening? What are you noticing? What looks different? And it's nice to have the 2 sand dunes next to each other, because while there definitely was some erosion on this one, once we take the cloth off, you can see this one is considerably higher than this one. So there was definitely some erosion that was prevented by putting this on top.
So students can see that different materials prevent the sand from washing away. And this is where if the students made 3 or even 4 sand dunes, they'll be able to test a different material on each sand dune. So they'll be able to use their worksheet and record how their different materials work. Solution idea number 1, number 2, and number 3. Compare and see which material works best to prevent the sand from washing away. Hopefully those demonstrations help you visualize what this might look like in your classroom, and please be in touch with any more ideas that we can share or any questions. Thanks so much. Have fun.